Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at another full frame lens from Meike. This is the Meike 55mm f1.8 Pro. This is an autofocus lens with all the electronics support, and this lens is available for Sony E, Nikon Z, Leica L and Fujifilm X mount. The sample I received from Meike is for the Leica L mount. And a quick disclaimer, I do not have to send the sample back after this review. All the different versions of this lens have the exact same optics design, so the image quality should be the same. For the L mount version that I have, Meike is not an official member of the L mount alliance, so it will be interesting to see how this lens performs in terms of autofocus and also all the other electronics features. The launch price of this Meike is $330, which is not really cheap for a third-party f1.8 lens, but Meike seems to have a lot of confidence with this lens. So in this review, since I got the L mount version of this Meike lens, I'm going to compare it with the Lumix S 50mm f1.8, which is a very solid, well-rounded 50mm lens from Panasonic. It is a lens that I use a lot when I'm shooting with my full-frame Lumix camera. The official price of the Lumix is $450, however, very often you can get the Lumix at a lower price, and sometimes a lot cheaper than the official price. So it means the price of this Meike is not necessarily cheaper than the Lumix. So it will be interesting to see if this Meike offers enough to make it an attractive option. The first thing I want to do is to show you a side-by-side comparison photo that's shot with the Meike 55 1.8 Pro and the Lumix S 50 1.8 from the exact same position using the same camera settings including white balance. If you look at these photos, you can see that the Meike is quite a bit tighter than Lumix in terms of field of view. The difference is a little bit bigger than I expected, as it's only 5mm difference in terms of focal length. Color-wise, the Lumix seems to be a little bit warmer and also a little bit more towards green than the Meike. The photo shot with the Meike also appears to be slightly brighter, but the difference is very tiny, only around 0.1 stop. So if you want to have a lens that is slightly tighter than a typical 50mm lens, this Meike 55mm lens may give you just exactly that. Meike called this lens a Pro lens. It means this is Meike's best quality lens. The lens has an aperture ring. There is a metal lens mount with USB-C port for firmware upgrade. There is a bright red rubber seal around the lens mount, but Meike has not claimed this is a weatherproof lens. While the body of this lens is mostly made of plastic, the weight of this lens is about 370 grams, so it's not exactly light, but I also won't call it heavy. The weight does make the lens feel quite solid. However, there is just a bit of that cheap feeling. The Lumix S 50 1.8 also has a pretty plasticky construction, but the Lumix feels more premium than the Meike. I guess it's just all those little details, like all the letters and numbers are just all printed on the Meike. The font choice is also not really elegant, and the lens hood, while it clicks nicely onto the lens, it just feels quite flimsy. So altogether, it just doesn't give me the feeling of what a Pro lens should feel like. But to be fair, I can see Meike has already made a lot of improvements over the last 2 or 3 years, but I just think the body design and some small details need a little bit more refinement to get rid of that cheap feeling. This Meike lens uses STM autofocus motor like the other recent Meike autofocus lenses. Autofocus operation is quiet but not silent. You can hear the autofocus noise when you are shooting indoor. It's not loud, but you can hear it. The autofocus speed is average. It's not very fast. It is especially noticeable when you are shooting in the evening when it's not really bright. However, things like face detection works fine, and I didn't notice any unexpected autofocus issue. When I did the video autofocus continuous test, it works very well, just pretty much like the Lumix S 51.8. If you want to manually focus this lens, there is a switch on the side of the lens that allows you to turn the lens into manual focus mode. If you are shooting with a L-mount camera like the Lumix S5 II, you can select linear or non-linear manual focus mode and the lens works really well in both modes. However, the focus ring turns in the opposite direction compared to a first-party L-mount lens. This surprised me a little bit because when I test the Meike 55mm f1.8, the manual focus ring turned in the same direction. So this can be a bit annoying or confusing to L-mount shooters. I hope Meike can release a firmware that can reverse the manual focus direction so it is the same as the normal first-party L-mount lenses. We'll look at the image sharpness now. I shot all the test photos using a 24 megapixel Lumix S5 II. The camera was set on a tripod, so all the sharpness test photos were shot from the same place. But because the Meike has a slightly longer focal length, so you will see the photos from the Meike are a little bit more zooming compared to the Lumix. Okay, let's start with the center. At f1.8, the Meike is sharp. Very sharp. Surprisingly, it is noticeably sharper than the Lumix at f1.8. Because the Meike is already so sharp at f1.8, so stopping down the Meike doesn't make it any sharper. Center sharpness remains the same until around f11 when diffraction softens the image. Let's look at the corner. At f1.8, the Meike is once again very sharp. And yes, it's sharper than the Lumix again. Stopping down the Meike would only improve the corner sharpness very slightly. I'm really surprised that the Meike is sharper than the Lumix at f1.8, both at the center and also at the corner. Focus at the center or focus at the corner doesn't change Meike's corner sharpness. However, when I focus at the corner, it does make Meike's center becomes slightly softer. So there may be some very minor field curvature. Meike's minimum focus distance is 55 cm, which is a little bit longer than most latest 50mm f1.8 lenses in the market. For example, the Lumix 51.8's minimum focus distance is 45 cm, so about 10 cm closer. Meike's maximum magnification ratio is 0.11, which is not terrible, but the Lumix is much better at around 0.15. One thing that Meike and Lumix both do really well is that the sharpness when shooting at minimum focus distance, even at f1.8, is still very sharp. With the f1.8 maximum aperture and 55mm focal length, you can dissolve the background quite a bit when shooting half-body portrait photos or other similar kind of close-up photos. Meike's bokeh looks not bad, however, I do see a little bit of cat's eye near the corner, and also some of the photos there is a bit of onion rings pattern in the bokeh ball. Both are not very serious, but you will see it if you pay close attention to the photo. For a lens at this price, I think it is very acceptable. If you look at this side-by-side comparison with the Lumix, both shot at f1.8, there really isn't any big difference between these two lenses. With the vignetting correction enabled, Meike has very minimal amount of vignetting at f1.8, even less than the Lumix. If I stop down the Meike slightly to f2.8, then vignetting is almost not noticeable. Actually, I even see a bit of negative vignetting. The corner is slightly brighter than the center, which suggests the profile correction has overcorrected vignetting, and this negative vignetting is visible even when we stop down the lens further. The Lumix 50mm lens does not have this issue. If I disable vignetting correction, not surprisingly, I see more vignetting from both lenses. But once again, the Meike has less vignetting than the Lumix at f1.8. When we stop down the lens to f4, the Meike has virtually no vignetting. Meike's chromatic aberration performance is very good. I see very small amount of chromatic aberration. It is pretty impressive. Look at this comparison with the Lumix. The amount of chromatic aberration is very similar between these two lenses. And now let's have a look at my local test photo. The Meike also performs very well. There is only very minimal amount of color fringing. We'll have a look at distortion next. The Meike shows quite a bit of barrel distortion in this brick wall test photo. And it seems the lens doesn't have any profile correction to correct distortion. The Lumix also has a little bit of barrel distortion when I disable the profile correction, but once I enable the profile correction, the Lumix has almost no visible distortion. Meike's lens flare performance is decent. There is only a small amount of lens flare and ghosting even when I shoot directly into the sun. And look at this comparison footage with the Lumix. I think the Lumix lens flare control is slightly better, but the Meike is not bad. It should be good enough for most users. Sunstar rendering is not the greatest with this Meike lens. You need to stop down a lot to see the Sunstars effect. And even when you stop down to minimum aperture f16, the tails of the Sunstar still spread out quite a bit, which is not my favorite. Lumix Sunstars also isn't that great, but I think it is slightly better than the Meike. But overall, I won't say I really like the Sunstar from either of these lenses. Let's have a look at the focus briefing performance. And this is my usual 1 meter to 20 meter focus briefing test. I'm really surprised by the Meike because there is virtually no focus briefing at all. The Lumix has a lot more focus briefing than the Meike. Look at the results from all my different image quality tests. I think it is quite clear that this Meike performs really well overall. There are a few things that the Lumix does better. For example, the minimum focus distance and the Sunstars rendering. But overall, I would say the Meike performs pretty much just as good as the Lumix, if not slightly better. It is really sharp both at the center and the corner. It has less vignetting, almost no focus briefing. So if you just want a lens with very good image quality, the Meike is actually better than the Lumix. I wasn't expecting that at all. However, it doesn't mean the Meike is a better lens overall. Autofocus performance is okay, but it's not as quiet or as fast as the Lumix. My biggest complaint of this lens would be the build or design of the body. Despite the lens has a metal lens mount and it does feel quite solid, it just still has that budget feeling that doesn't really match the Pro name tag. As I said earlier, I think Meike has improved a lot over the last 2-3 years, but if Meike want to move towards the more premium market and charge more or less the same price as some first-party lenses, I feel they need to do a little bit more work. I mean, the optics of this lens is great, but that is not enough if you want to sell the lens at the same price as first-party lenses. You really need to make people feel your product is same quality or better quality than the first-party equivalent lens. If Meike can improve the body design, I think lens with image quality like this Meike 55 1.8 Pro can become a very popular choice.